If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I wasn't supposed to end up in Blackroot Hollow. I'm 38, a history teacher from Asheville, and the only reason I even wandered near those woods was because I'd been trying to trace my grandmother's side of the family. She'd grown up poor in the Carolina foothills, in a pocket of Appalachia where the last census takers quit halfway up the ridge. My mom always told me there were pieces of land nobody in the family talked about, properties that weren't meant for us anymore. She said it like it was a matter of inheritance, but the older I got, the more it sounded like superstition. I was at the university library one night, digging through Brittle County ledgers, when I found a reference to a place called Blackroot Hollow. It wasn't on Google Maps, and the one survey from 1924 said simply, "Land unsuitable for settlement, sinkholes, poor drainage, anomalous vegetation." But what caught my eye was a tiny penciled note in the margin. McGinnis family cleared off 1911 after the Whispering Thing took their boy. My grandmother's maiden name was McGinnis. I should have taken it as a story, one of those exaggerated mountain myths. But I had just gone through a messy divorce, was drinking too much, and if I'm honest, looking for any excuse to feel tethered to something again. So when summer break hit, I packed up my Subaru, printed the old survey, and told myself it would be nothing more than a personal genealogy field trip. The roads got narrower the deeper I went, the asphalt cracking into gravel, then dissolving into clay ruts. My GPS dropped out 10 miles back, and I'd been following handwritten notes from a retired surveyor I found on a genealogy forum. He'd written, "If you pass the rusted school bus, you've gone too far. Backtrack until you see the sycamore with lightning scars." It was ridiculous, like navigating by folk poetry, but damned if it didn't work. I found the sycamore, its bark clawed open like a scar, and pulled onto a trail so overgrown my bumper collected weeds like trophies. The silence came quick. No crickets, no cicadas, just the wind pressing down on branches. I killed the engine, and the absence of sound felt like stepping underwater. I wasn't more than half a mile in before I saw the cabin. Not a shack like in horror movies. This was sturdier once. The bones of a proper log home, collapsed porch, roofline caved in but stubborn walls still holding. Around it, the trees grew wrong, bent but not by storms. They leaned away, like the house was pushing them back. And the ground, black mud streaked with veins of something that wasn't sap. It looked tarry, and it shimmered faintly even in shade. I should have taken a picture and left. But teachers aren't known for good sense when curiosity gets its hooks in. I stepped onto the porch. My boot went through rotted wood, and I nearly twisted my ankle, but I yanked free and tried the front door. It moved too easily, like someone had oiled the hinges yesterday. Inside, the air smelled damp and sweet, like wet leaves left to rot in a bucket. The floor was bare except for a square of newer boards in the back. My heart rate kicked up when I saw the nails, shiny, not rusted. Someone had replaced those planks recently. I knelt, tugged at one, and the whole section shifted. Beneath it was a hatch, rimmed in black residue, like the wood had bled where it touched the frame. I told myself it was just a cellar. Appalachia is full of those, places to store potatoes or hide moonshine from revenuers. But when I lifted the hatch, a breath of cold rose up, wet and steady, like something exhaling after a long hold. The tunnel was too narrow for stairs. Hand-dug, earth walls braced with roots. My flashlight beam caught scratches, deep grooves down both sides. Something had clawed its way along, over and over, until the marks looked like tally lines. I climbed down anyway, bracing elbows and knees, sliding into darkness. It opened into a chamber, small, round, like the inside of a well. And the walls, God help me, the walls weren't dirt. They were bone. Vertebrae stacked like bricks. Ribs slotted into each other like rafters. Skulls facing inward, eye sockets ringed with black resin that dripped down like candle wax. At the center was a pit. Something crouched there. Not asleep, not awake. Its skin stretched so thin it reflected my flashlight. Two long arms wrapped around a bundle of fabric, My stomach lurched when I saw the bundle wasn't cloth, it was boots. Scuffed brown leather boots. My grandmother's brother, William McGinnis, had disappeared in 1911, age 9. I'd seen his shoes in an old photo once. I swear to you, they looked the same. I whispered, "William?" The thing's head lifted. Its face was blank skin, except for a split where a mouth should have been. That mouth tore wider, but no sound came out. Instead, the chamber itself whispered. Voices, hundreds of them, some clear, some backward, overlapping until I couldn't tell if they were outside my skull or clawing through my memories. My own name tangled in the static. Elias. Elias. That's when my chest locked, like invisible hands were squeezing my lungs. I dropped the flashlight. Its beam skittered, spun across bone, and caught a movement. Something slick pulling itself from between the skulls, like worms abandoning soil. That broke me. I clawed my way up the tunnel, ripping my arms raw on roots. By the time I burst into daylight, I was sobbing, my shirt plastered with mud and streaked with something black that wouldn't wash off. I ran until I tripped out onto the trail where I'd parked. The Subaru was still there, but the woods didn't look right anymore. The trees closer together, the air thicker. I drove out on instinct, headlights stabbing through branches even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Back in Asheville, I tried to forget. I buried myself in work, papers to grade, lectures to prep. But the call started 2 weeks later. Not ringing, voicemails. My phone would light up around midnight, same time each night, and when I played them back, all I heard was breathing. Slow, wet, steady. Once, though, it wasn't just breathing. A child's voice whispered, "Don't answer when it knows your name." The next morning, I found black residue on my front porch, streaked across the welcome mat. Like something had pressed dripping fingers there, waiting. It hasn't stopped. It's been 3 months. I've moved apartments twice. I switched numbers. But at 12:17 every night, my phone buzzes with a voicemail. Sometimes it's just static. Sometimes it's trees cracking. And once, God help me, it was my grandmother's voice, 50 years younger than I ever knew her, saying, "Elias, you shouldn't have opened the floor." And I believe her. Because each night, the messages last a little longer. Each night, the whisper grows clearer. And last night, for the first time, it didn't say my name. It said my daughter's. I was not the kind of person who believed in inherited curses. I believed in paperwork. I'm 42, a municipal assessor from Cincinnati, the sort of bureaucrat people groan about when their property bills bump up after I've measured an extra porch step. When the county auction list crossed my desk with a cluster of tax-delinquent parcels in eastern Kentucky, I didn't think ghosts. I thought margins. My brother flips houses, I run numbers, and sometimes, if the deed is clean and the roof mostly keeps rain out, we make something livable out of a place everyone else forgot. That's how I came to Dry Chimney Gap on the Cumberland Plateau, a place the highway doesn't bother to notice. The old Salt Lick Trace runs near it, a rutted track that once carried salt and coal, and, if old men at gas stations are to be believed, unreported bodies. Dry Chimney Gap isn't a town so much as a leftover. 2 sagging trailers, a church that lists to one side like a boat taking on water, and a scatter of weather-silvered houses clutching the hillside with porches like loose teeth. The parcel on my sheet was Lot 17, 1 acre, a foreclosed farmhouse and an outbuilding, minimum bid paid by anonymous previous heir. It was already transferred to me. I'd done the title search, found nothing sticky, and drove down thinking I'd photograph the place, record structural issues, and tell my brother it could be saved with sweat and a dumpster. The GPS died 6 miles out, a swallow of road cut through walls of laurel and rhododendron, the kind of green that eats sound. I followed written directions from the county clerk. Turn left at the rusted Coca-Cola sign, right where the road slumps, then keep straight past the fallen silo. And this is how you know you're in a part of the map that isn't sure it wants you. The landmarks aren't new. They are the remains of other people's attempts. I reached town by a grace you only admit after the fact. The diner was open, which meant one woman brewing coffee behind a counter and a man asleep in a corner booth wearing a cap from a mine that closed before I was born. The woman wore her hair pinned up with a pencil. Her name tag said ARLA in letters that had once been read. "You from the county?" she asked, even before I ordered. "Assessor's office," I said, showing her my clipboard like a priest holding up a cross. Looking at lot 17, Old Faro Place. She looked at the window instead of me. We called at the counting house. Why? Arla took longer than necessary to set my coffee down, because for a stretch of years, folks around there heard something going from wall to wall at night, tapping. Not fast, not begging, just taking its time. People say if you count along, it learns your rhythm. Then it keeps your rhythm when you ain't there. My cousin called it the counting guest. My cousin is also the sort that salted both sides of his door frame, so you make of it what you want. She slid a little bowl of powdered creamer toward me. If you're dead set on lifting that latch, don't say your full name in the house. Don't say anyone else's neither. And if it knocks, don't answer back. I'm here to take pictures, I said, trying to make my smile easy. No latches lifted unless they're on cabinets. Arla said, which is a mountain woman's way of wishing you luck without insulting your pride. Salt's cheap. The Faro Place sat a mile up Dry Chimney Road, which isn't a road so much as the idea of one. Trees leaned toward each other overhead like old gossipers, and the air tasted like a can you opened last week and forgot to throw out. The house appeared all at once when I crested a rise. A two-story farmhouse with a square face, porch sagging but not dropped, paint flaked to the gray of dead skin. A stack of stones beside it marked where a chimney used to be. That's where the gap gets its name, somebody told me later, from chimneys standing after houses burned. The outbuilding hunched a little downhill, corrugated roof peeled back like a sardine tin. The front door was unlocked. That felt less like an invitation and more like a test. I stepped into a foyer that smelled of old wool and boiled weeds. Dust softened everything, banister, picture frames with the photos taken out, a piano with keys like missing teeth. In the kitchen, a row of glass jars lined one shelf, lids paraffined. The labels shocked me into an ugly laugh. In that same shaky hand you see in old Bibles, someone had written names that were not names. Gall milk, threadbone, soot leaf, for widows, for lost ones, for when they knock. In a city, that's cute. In a house whose windows look toward a valley that refuses to echo, those labels read like orders. I did what I always do in old houses. Measured the rooms with a tape, noted the swell where the floor cupped, photographed the damp creeping up one wall. The power was off, the water a rumor. In the back bedroom upstairs, I found something I shouldn't have. Not bones, not a pentagram, just a room made colder than the rest on a day already thin with autumn. The walls were pinned full with notebook pages, corners nailed like butterflies. The handwriting, again that shivering script, repeated a single line until the ink dug grooves. Do not keep the count. Do not give it yours. Not the first time, not while sober, did I believe in anything but people going mad in slow, careful handwriting. I took photos. I recorded the warning in my notes with the same bland tone I used for missing trim in northwest room. Then, because I am a particular kind of fool, I stayed the night. This is not how I would tell my mother. I would tell her the truck broke down, or the bridge outwashed behind me, or that I meant to make 2 trips but the sky fell fast, like it does in these hills, which is true. Also true. I wanted to see if the house moaned the way it looked like it should. Men in my line of work tell stories about raccoons in chimneys and wasp nests in ovens like veterans comparing scars. I wanted one to add. I unrolled my sleeping bag in the front room where the floor felt least spongy, set a lantern on a crate, and wedged a chair beneath the doorknob like I was starring in a movie about bad decisions. At 3:12 in the morning, my phone face lit to that precise minute. I woke to a sound that wasn't dream and wasn't weather. 5 taps on the front wall. Slow, measured, between each a breath like whoever stood there didn't need air, but took it anyway because ritual matters. A long rest, then 5 taps on the window frame, 5 on the baking cabinet, 5 on the stairwell newel. If you live alone long enough, you talk back to creaks. House, you say as if it were a dog, we're not doing this. I almost said that. What I actually did was clutch the folding rule I'd fallen asleep with, as if inches of brass could be a weapon, and count in my head to steady myself. That was my mistake. That was the door I didn't know I was opening. When the knocking moved to the wall by my right ear, my tongue betrayed me. I counted out loud. 1. Then, because instinct is a stupid animal. 2. 3. The knocking stopped. In that sudden blank, a sound stitched itself through the house. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't wind. It had the rhythm of a clock with a bad heart. Plastered dust sifted from the ceiling. My phone screen blinked and died while at 80%. The lantern guttered to a pinpoint, then flared and held. "Okay," I said, which is not prayer and not brave either. I stood up too fast, and the pinched place in my lower back I'd been ignoring all day bit hard. I limped to the door and put my palm against it. It was cold as a fish too long out of water. When I pulled my hand away, 5 circles of condensation marked where my fingers had been, and then they vanished, as if something had drunk them. I didn't sleep, but dawn came anyway, that pewter light that makes everything look like nothing is wrong. Outside, the porch swing lay flipped in the yard, 20 feet into the damp grass, chains coiled beside it as neatly as if a careful man had unscrewed them links by link. The outbuilding door stood ajar, and inside, freshly disturbed earth made a low swell in the far corner, the way ground rises when a thaw goes down to where it shouldn't. I did not touch it. I am curious, not suicidal. At the diner, Arla poured without asking. "You look like a person who didn't keep his eyes shut," she said. "I heard something moving from wall to wall," I said. 5 knocks each time. Then it paced the house. My phone died. I stopped before saying I counted. You learn fast which parts of yourself to keep. She dried her hands on a rag that had seen cleaner days. 3:12, she said, not a question. Old siren time. Back when the mind still whistled folks to change, the night shift flipped at 3. People say the guest learned to time itself by machines. When the whistle stopped for good, it kept on coming, still wanting to be let in to take the count on something. You hear what I'm saying to you? I hear, I said. What happens if I answer it? Depends, she said, weighing me with a glance that took in my spreadsheet brain and my city shoes. Some say it takes your breath count and breathes it back into you when it wants you to stop. Some say it learns your habits and starts arriving before you do. Some say it never learned what a door was, so it goes around houses memorizing the edges until it's a door itself. All I know is, don't say names in there. Don't count. Don't dig where the ground don't lay right. She slid a salt shaker toward me with the practiced flick of a bartender who knows when a customer needs more than beer. You put this on either side of your door. I ain't telling you it'll help. I am telling you it helped my granny sleep. On my way out, a man by the window spoke without turning his head. He was the kind of skinny that comes from hard work and not enough meat, with a face that might have been 30 or 60 depending on light. Pharaoh woman kept notebooks, he said, pinned them up like moths. Wrote the same line so many times she carved through. Got so thin her jaw creaked. Sheriff said nerves. Preacher said sin. But my daddy says Mr. Pharaoh dug up something beside the shed, dug it twice. Second time, he reburied it with a chain. You find a chain in the dirt, you close that door, sir. I should have driven home. I should have mailed my brother the keys and told him to knock the place down and pay teenagers to haul the boards to the dump. But when you've put your name on a parcel and you've already let the house count your breath, leaving feels like letting a stranger carry your child across a river. I went back. Day gives you courage it has no right to sell. I walked the property as if I knew what I was doing, tracing the fence line, cataloging the apple trees giving themselves up to rot, the hummock where the ground swelled under the shed. When I lifted the shed door, the smell of drowned iron pushed tears into my eyes. The dirt inside was lumpy where shovel had met rock, then been smoothed by hands. I did not step in. I knelt and brushed aside a scattering of leaves at the threshold. My fingers found rust flaking into damp earth. Chain. Not a great big anchor thing, just links as thick as a little finger, gone soft with years underground. Buried wrong, I heard myself say, and had no idea where the phrase came from until I remembered the man in the diner, and Arla, and the way the mine siren would have sliced night into pieces, back when men timed their lives by other men's whistles. The house took that as permission. At 3:12, the knocks came again. I had poured salt in hasty lines by the doors, stubbing my toe in the dark like a fool, and locked every window, even after I'd seen how weak their latches were. I sat in a chair with my hands around a mug of coffee that had gone oily. 5 taps on the parlor wall, 5 on the pantry, 5 on the stair. I sang under my breath instead of counting. My daughter used to fall asleep in a car seat to the tune of whatever song the radio forgot to finish, and sometimes, When panic asks for a password, your heart gives it a lullaby. By the third verse, the knocking changed. I got curious. I could feel the interest of a thing without eyes. It came to the front door and leaned against it, not pushing, just resting, so I could measure the weight with my skin. It breathed a little, the way a person does when they're remembering how to speak. The pores on my forearms felt like open mouths. When it knocked that time, the sound was faintly hollow, almost like knuckles against wood from very far away. I didn't count. I didn't answer. The house went quiet, and then the quiet moved into me and took up a chair. In the morning, the notebooks in the cold room had turned. I don't mean shuffled. The nails were still in each corner, but every page now faced inward. Where I had read "Do not keep the count" last afternoon, I now read paperbacks printed with bleed-through, the letters faint, as if they were writing to the wall and didn't want me to overhear. I stood there long enough to get lightheaded from holding my breath, then forced myself to take one long, normal inhale and another. If I gave the house a pattern, it could have it. It already did. On the third day, I lasted less well. Something about 3 nights makes a place decide what it's going to be to you. On the third afternoon, while measuring the attic joists, I found a bundle tucked where the slope meets the wall. A child's shoe, soft leather brittle with time, and a little paper packet folded like a note. The packet was labeled for return things. Inside lay a strand of human hair braided into a ring and 3 white seeds. Don't ask me how I knew they were seeds. They were smooth as teeth, but they didn't feel like teeth. I shouldn't have touched them. I slid the packet back and convinced myself I had not added anything to whatever tally the house kept. At dusk I saw a woman walking the ridge, a shotgun slung easy across her back. She did not look at the house. She looked at the line of trees as if she could read what the branches said. I waved, because I am a city person who still thinks waving is neutral. She did not wave back. Only later, at the diner, would I learn her name, May Clemmer, who ran trap lines when everyone else ran debts. She would tilt her chin at me while I stirred creamer and say, "You put salt down." And when I nodded, she would say, "That ain't for it. That's for you. To remind yourself there's a line." That night there was no knocking. There was dragging. A slow pull against the back wall like someone moving a trunk made of wet books. The lantern pulsed. The shadow of the banister moved the wrong way, like a sundial at midnight. I paced the front room, stubbornness clenched between my teeth, and told myself over and over that the mind wants to make patterns, and the house was only feeding me blank space to scribble monsters in. Something breathed at the keyhole. The keyhole breathed back. At 3:12 a voice came through the wood like water through stone. I would not call it a voice if it had said anything but my name. The first syllable fell wrong, like a child practicing, the second too right, as if someone I loved had spoken it 1,000 times across a kitchen. I didn't answer. I pressed my palms against my ears as if my bones didn't also hear. The thing at the door exhaled a long, careful time. Then it tapped once, like a final period, and left itself spread thin across the walls. The house held its breath. When it let go, something fragile went with it. In the morning, my phone had 6 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, the area code local. Each voicemail was different lengths of silence. On the 7th, a little boy laughed and said, in a satisfied way, 7. He sounded exactly like I did at 5 in a cassette my mother keeps in a shoebox. I packed, because men like me only get brave in stories we tell about ourselves later. I rolled my sleeping bag, put my notes in a zip folder, carried the lantern out to the porch where the air felt like if you breathed it wrong, it would remember. I set everything in the truck bed, and went back for one more thing I can't explain wanting. The notebook page on which the letters had been carved so deep they nearly cut free. I pried it loose from the nail, and slid it into my clipboard. When I shut the door for the last time, the latch licked against the strike as gently as a tongue. Halfway down the hill, the woman with the shotgun stepped out from behind a sweet gum. Not blocking me, just there like a mile marker the road had decided to put on legs. Up close her face was younger than I'd guessed, all contradiction, smooth forehead, eyes that had watched barn roofs go off in wind. She looked past me at the house, then at my hands, which still dusted salt. "You hear it?" she asked. "I don't want to talk about it," I said, which is how grown men say yes. She nodded as if I had given the only right answer. My daddy said it learned to keep time from whistles, and then from people. He said the last time he went calling coon dogs in that gap, it kept pace to the click of his lighter until he couldn't stop flicking. Then he threw the bick in the creek so he could go home. You keep your rhythm your own. I'm leaving, I said. If the county wants it condemned, they can find another fool. Most folks just go. She scratched the back of her wrist with her thumb. Not a nervous gesture, so much as a reminder to herself that skin is where we end. Do me a favor. When it calls again, don't listen. She tipped her head toward the outbuilding. And don't dig. Don't ever dig. I promised a stranger something I should have promised myself, and drove. The road down looked like a different road, as if it had made choices while I was in the house. Twice I took turns that weren't there earlier. Once I passed the same burned shell of a pickup 3 times. Say what you will, there are places that do not want to be departed in a straight line. Back in Cincinnati, my brother called about haul-away costs and whether the porch could be jacked. I told him I'd email photos. I did not tell him the parlor measured a breath wider on the second night than the first. I did not tell him my phone screen sometimes woke at 3:12 and tried to show me a live view of my own back steps. I did not tell him that I kept hearing a knocking from the radiator pipes in my apartment that never knocked before. 5 taps and a pause, 5 taps and a pause. And that even in a city, no one wants to be the fool measuring ghosts with a tape. The first week, the calls came every night at 3:12. I learned to let the phone buzz without lighting the screen. On the 8th night, it didn't ring. I woke anyway, exactly at the right minute, my heart pacing a shape I couldn't fit math to. The silence lay too heavy, air with weight. Then, from the wall above my pillow, 5 gentle knocks. I stared at the paint. The pattern repeated on the window frame, and there wasn't any wind. Panic fled. Something colder came and sat where panic had. I counted in my head, and then forced myself to alphabetize the mascots of every minor league baseball team I knew. Because fear loves a list, and names are a way to make a door. I got to the Montgomery Biscuits and started to cry because I was grateful for a world where a team is named after breakfast. When people in stories ask for help, they go to priests. I went to the county clerk. I told myself I needed a copy of a plat map I'd failed to scan. What I wanted was to see whether the pharaohs had ever filed anything strange, restrictive covenants, notes of sale. The clerk, a woman with the tired gentleness of someone who has notarized divorces in triplicate, slid me a folder whose metal brads had left green shadows in the paper. In the pharaoh file lay a deed transfer and a letter never mailed. It was written in that see-through script from the bedroom, but steadier, as if the writer had found a last strong place to stand inside herself. If you are blood of mine, read me, it began. We owe what we owe. We borrowed the hill when we shouldn't. I thought a chain would count in our place. It didn't. You can't pay back breath with iron. There was no date, only the old name for Dry Chimney Gap, Husher's Hollow, and the line that made my mouth go dry in a way coffee can't fix. When it knows your number, it arrives early. I heard it at sundown this evening. I walked home in a hurry. No one watching would have noticed. I salted my own apartment doorposts, because shame costs less than funerals. I unplugged the radiator because that's not how radiators work, and the brain needs to do something with its hands. At 3:12, the phone stayed dark. Something tapped the headboard twice, and then my downstairs neighbor's dog started barking. The strangled kind of bark that means it wants to bark and something in the room wants it not to. When I rolled to my side to face the wall, my breath fogged the paint. It didn't used to do that. You want a neat ending. You want me to sell the parcel, or burn the house, or buy a priest with a regional specialty. I did sell the parcel. The county accepted my affidavit of structural unsafety and took Lot 17 back. It won't matter. Some places keep their owners whether paper agrees or not. I sleep with a metronome on the nightstand now, an app that clicks to a tempo I can choose. I change it every night, 80 beats, then 63, then 120, and sometimes it helps. Sometimes the metronome slows without my hand on the phone. Last week, at 7:26 in the evening, my daughter called from college to ask about a FAFSA form. The call dropped for no reason, and when I rang her back, her voice sounded 3 rooms away. "Hang on," she said. "I'll go where the signal's better." And then, under that, far too close to my ear to have come from 3 states away, a whisper said my name exactly right. After the second syllable, it added, contentedly, too. I do not count out loud anymore. I do not count in my head if I can help it. When the radiator knocks, I turn up music. When the phone hums at the wrong hour, I let it leave its message unheard. This is not bravery. It is the opposite. It is refusal. You don't answer the door just because something is polite enough to knock evenly. It will learn my rhythm regardless. That is what it does. I can see now what Arla meant about salt being for the person and not the thing. You mark where you end. You change your stride on purpose. You break your own habits with both hands. You do not give it your number for free. If you stand in my living room at exactly 3:12, you can feel the walls lean a hair in, as if the apartment wanted to breathe with you. It's almost sweet, the way a child's hand is soft even when it grips too hard. Do not mistake sweetness for safety. The counting guest is kind the way a clock is kind. It will sit patient as a dog outside the Pharaoh house and outside mine, and if I am wrong about everything I think I know outside yours, it will tap 5 times on a wall it has learned to love like bone, and then it will wait while you panic or sing or count out loud to be sure of yourself. It will take what you give it and bring it back to you when it needs you still. I keep the page I pried from the cold room under my mattress. Sometimes I slide it out and run my finger along the grooves where the ink dug through. The letters are so thin now they almost float. Do not keep the count, it says, and sometimes the words look different, like light through gauze. Sometimes the hole between the letters looks bigger than the letters themselves. On those nights I sleep for exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes without an alarm, and when I wake, I know I have been counted in places that do not require a house or a door. I lie still, holding my breath until the first tap on the wall begins. Then I say my daughter's name in my head and smash it at once into a nonsense alphabet, because a father is also a door, and the only thing I have left to bar it with is this. What comes in through counting can be starved by the refusal to be regular. It will not be enough. No one gets out of math, but I am learning to make my own arithmetic ugly. I limp when I'm not hurt. I take 7 steps to the kitchen one night and 9 the next. I let a kettle scream, and then I do not pour. I sleep in the chair, then under it, then 2 streets over at a friend's without telling him why. The neighbor's dog has stopped barking. My phone sometimes lights at odd hours, not 3:12, and shows me a view of trees I do not recognize, rain not falling through them. I do not open the messages. I do not need a picture to know the porch swing there will be flipped neatly, chains coiled beside it like bracelets waiting on a wrist. If you ever buy a parcel with a nickname that sounds like a rule, pay attention. If you hear 5 knocks, don't be clever. Be rude. Make your life uneven, unmetered, unappealing to anything that loves a pattern. Change your walk. Scatter your sleep. Swallow your name. Go a whole day without counting a single thing. You will fail. We all do. The miracle is how long the house will wait for you to fail. The greater miracle is that the world keeps the lights on anyway. Tonight I will not set the metronome. Tonight I will hum a tune whose beat I don't remember, and I will breathe on purpose wrong. When the wall taps 5 times, I will say nothing. When the phone hums, I will let it. When the radiator sighs like a person who finally found the porch they were pacing toward, I will get up and pour salt into a line I will cross and scuff and renew. Because it isn't magic, it is memory. You mark what you can, where you can, until you learn which parts of yourself should never be written down. The counting guest knows me. That is already done. It will call again, and I will pretend I am deaf. If I am lucky, it will keep my rhythm for me until the very last minute, then fold it back into my chest. If I am unlucky, it will arrive early, pleased with itself. Either way, when it knocks, the door will be where it always was. The trick is keeping your hand off the latch. The trick is staying irregular long enough to die of something ordinary. The trick is telling yourself, without counting, that you do not live in that house anymore, even though the truth is simpler and worse. The house lives in you, and it is very, very patient. I was 29 when I first saw Splitfoot Ridge. I wasn't looking for it, not really. I was looking for my cousin Mara, who had gone missing 2 weeks after she inherited an old farmhouse from our great-uncle, a man neither of us had ever met. The letter had come from a law office in Charleston, crisp and businesslike, saying the property was hers if she wanted it. 2 days later, she started getting strange phone calls from a number tied to Clay County. Always a woman's voice, slow and rough, repeating the same phrase. Take it proper, or it'll walk. The sheriff filed a report when Mara vanished, but everyone in the county knew they wouldn't look too hard. She was young, restless, and had a history of bolting when life got too heavy. Still, I couldn't shake it. She called me the night before she disappeared, whispering that she'd seen something standing by the tree-line. Too tall, too still, its head bent like it was listening. Then the call dropped. I drove down 3 days later. Splitfoot Ridge wasn't marked on maps. You had to follow a two-lane road until it curved away from the canal, then climb gravel switchbacks until the guardrails ended and the asphalt dissolved into dirt. The woods pressed so close overhead the sky looked like a ribbon you could lose if you blinked. I'd been raised in cities, used to grids and hum, and the quiet out there felt too thick, as if the air itself had weight. The farmhouse sat hunched at the end of a clearing, its siding the gray of wet ash, its roofline sagging like shoulders. The porch leaned so badly it looked tired of standing. Half the windows were covered with nailed sheets of metal flashing, not boards, thin sheets that clinked in the breeze like coins. I killed the engine and sat a long minute, listening. The air smelled faintly metallic, like pennies left in water. Somewhere nearby, water moved, though I couldn't see a creek. Inside, the house was wrong in a way I didn't have words for at first. Not dirty, not ruined, just arranged. Every piece of furniture was draped in canvas sheets, except for a single armchair in the front room facing a dark TV. On the kitchen shelves, glass jars were stacked in neat rows. Their labels were handwritten in a trembling script: stilled root, bitter ash, for the hollow men, for the ones that walk. I spent that first night on the floor with a flashlight and a crowbar. I thought I'd hear mice, raccoons, maybe even coyotes. What I got was knocking. At 3:14 in the morning, 5 deliberate taps rapped against the wall near my head. Not frantic, not random, spaced, patient. Then 5 more at the back door. Then the pantry. Then the staircase. A circuit around the house, slow as someone pacing the perimeter of a prison cell. I held my breath, gripping the crowbar so tight my knuckles popped. When it stopped, I realized I'd been counting along. The next day, I went into town, if you could call it that. A gas pump, a diner, a handful of trailers sinking into clay. The man behind the counter at the gas station stared at the old brass key in my hand and muttered something about chains breaking again. At the diner, conversation stopped when I walked in. A woman with lined eyes and flour on her apron whispered as she poured my coffee, "Don't answer it. Don't count." By dusk I was back at the house, stomach full of coffee and warnings. I found myself staring across the clearing at the neighboring ridge. That's when I saw it. A figure that looked like a scarecrow, except it wasn't in a field. It stood maybe 20 yards from the nearest cabin, arms slack, head angled down as if peering into the window. I blinked, and it was gone. That night, the knocking returned. Only this time, when it reached the front door, the knob turned once, twice, like someone testing it. I nearly bolted, but something in me said stillness was safer. When dawn came, the porch swing was gone, pulled free of its chains. I found it later, propped against the woodshed as if set there carefully by unseen hands. On the third night, I climbed into the attic searching for anything of Mara's. What I found was a box of cassette tapes, each labeled in the same trembling hand as the jars: tongue, wall, shadow. Again, I slid one into a player I found buried under quilts. Static filled the room. Underneath, faint whispers layered like wind through dry corn. Let it walk. Let it walk. Let it walk. Another tape held our great-uncle's voice. Comet first, describing a tall figure that lingered beyond the creek each night. "It doesn't move," he said. "Doesn't blink. Each night, it comes a step closer." His tone cracked halfway through. He began begging, repeating, "We all feed it, or it takes everything." Then a scream tore through the static, so sharp I ripped the tape out with shaking hands. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Whatever lived here wasn't just folklore. It was something the town tolerated, something chained by ritual. And my cousin had broken that chain. I tried to leave, packed my bag, pocketed the tapes, and marched down the gravel drive. But when I reached the bend where the road should have continued, all I found was trees. The way out had folded shut. I doubled back, tried again. Each time, the woods rearranged themselves. By the 4th attempt, I was standing in the yard again, staring at the house as if it had pulled me back. That night, the knocking didn't wait until 3. It started just after sunset. This time, it came with whispers, low, threading through the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster and heard my own name spoken in a dozen voices. The lantern flickered, then died. In the reflection of the darkened TV, I saw a tall figure standing behind me, head bent, waiting. When I turned, nothing was there. Sleep became impossible. I sat by the fire pit, feeding the tapes in one by one. As the flames curled them into plastic puddles, voices screamed, male, female, young, old, all overlapping in agony. One tape called my name. Another called Mara's. The fire roared green for a moment, and the trees around the clearing leaned inward, groaning like rafters under weight. By dawn, I knew 2 things. The townsfolk weren't just superstitious, and the figure wasn't going to stop. The following night, I saw it clear for the first time. Across the clearing, just beyond the reach of the porch light. Tall, too tall, its arms hanging past its knees, its head cocked like a bird hearing something beneath the soil. Its skin, or whatever passed for skin, looked pale and bark-like, cracked as if it had grown from the ridge itself. And where its feet should have touched earth, there was only shadow, spilling out in long tendrils that twitched in rhythm with the knocks. I don't remember deciding to move. One minute I was staring, the next I was halfway across the clearing with the crowbar in my hands. When I swung, the metal passed through like mist. But the figure leaned close, and though it had no face, I felt breath against my cheek, damp and cold. The next morning, the scarecrow I'd glimpsed on the ridge was sprawled across the hood of Mara's car. Its head was gone. Its straw guts had been spread in a perfect circle, as though marking a place. I didn't clean it up. I couldn't. I've been here 3 weeks now. The road hasn't returned. The knocks come earlier each night. Sometimes I hear Mara's voice in them. Sometimes I hear my own a second behind. I've stopped burning the tapes. There are too many. I think they refill the box when I'm not looking. The locals won't come closer than the diner parking lot, but Marcy, the waitress, slipped me a folded scrap of paper. In her neat script, "The hollow man walks when a house forgets its family. If you stay, you are the family now." So I sit in this chair, in front of the dark TV, waiting. I tell myself I won't count when it knocks, but sometimes the rhythm pulls the numbers out of me anyway. Last night, after the 5th set, the door creaked open even though the chair was wedged beneath it, and from the shadowed hall, a voice that sounded like mine whispered, "It's your turn to feed it." I don't know what that means. I don't know what it wants. But I know this: every morning, the clearing looks a little different. The trees closer, the house leaning, the jars in the kitchen shifting places. And tonight, for the first time, the knocking didn't circle the walls. It came from beneath the floor. If this account ever makes it out of Splitfoot Ridge, know this: don't take property that was never meant for you. Don't inherit what the land itself has claimed. And if you ever hear 5 measured knocks in the hollow of night, do not count them. Because once you start, it learns your rhythm. And once it learns your rhythm, it doesn't stop until you're walking with it. I was 32 the summer I ended up in Cedar Hollow, West Virginia. I didn't set out to live there. I'm not even sure you could call what I did living. I had been teaching high school history in Raleigh, but a messy divorce and the kind of burnout that leaves you staring at papers without grading them finally broke me. I put in a resignation letter that was more apology than explanation, loaded my books and clothes into a beat-up Corolla, and told myself I'd drive until something told me to stop. The something turned out to be a phone call. A number I didn't recognize rang while I was crossing the state line. The voice on the other end was flat, male, and deliberate. "Ellis has a place," he said. "Cheap. Cash. Don't touch the shed." I didn't ask who Ellis was, or how they had my number. Maybe I was tired enough to accept it as a kind of mercy. The directions he gave me led higher into the mountains than I'd ever driven. Switchbacks cut so tight my tires screamed, gravel roads where the guardrails had long since rusted away. By the time I saw the sign nailed to a leaning pine, "Welcome to Cedar Hollow," it felt less like I'd reached a town, and more like I'd driven off the map entirely. The trailer sat in a clearing, perched unevenly on cinder blocks. Its siding was streaked with rust, the front steps sagged under my weight, and there was no mailbox, no neighbors, no sound but the constant hiss of cicadas that cut off the moment I killed the engine. A note was taped to the screen door, key under mat. "Rent due 1st of month. Don't go out walking after dark." Inside, the place smelled faintly of mildew and iron. The mattress sagged, the couch had stuffing spilling from one arm, and the stove leaked gas when I tried it. The only thing that worked reliably was the refrigerator, humming in the corner like a nervous animal. The back window looked out into the woods. Not the friendly kind of woods, with clearings and bird chatter. These trees grew thick and close, their trunks warped in ways that made you think of bones pressed too long under weight. That first night I lay awake, listening. Coyotes howled somewhere distant. Then, all at once, the night collapsed into silence. No insects. No rustling branches. Not even wind. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the hollow, like I was lying in a vacuum. The next day, I found the diner. Every hollow town has one. The kind with a dozen stools bolted to the counter and coffee that tastes of scorched earth. The woman behind the counter was in her 60s, hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Her name tag read Shirley. She poured me coffee without asking. "You're in Ellis's place," she said flatly. Not a question. I admitted I was. She stared a long moment, as if she were measuring me, then said very clearly, "Don't walk the ridge after dark." "Why not?" I asked. Shirley's gaze slid past me to the window. She didn't answer. That night, sleep refused to come. At 2:11 a.m., I remember the clock digits glowing like red eyes. I sat bolt upright, compelled for no reason I could name. Outside the back window, something moved between the trees. A figure, human in outline, gliding more than walking. No flashlight, no phone glow. Just a silhouette weaving through the woods, as if it knew every root and hollow. It never looked toward the trailer, never stumbled, just slipped deeper into the forest and was gone. In the morning I checked the fence line. Nothing but dew-soaked grass and trunks. I was about to turn back when I noticed something draped across the wire fence. A rope. Brand new. Perfectly coiled into a loop. Not tossed, not weathered, placed. Like a trap someone was proud of. I texted the number that had given me directions. No answer. That evening at the diner, Shirley was already pouring coffee when I walked in. Without looking at me, she asked, "You see the rope?" I swallowed. "Yeah. What does it mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled a battered spiral notebook from under the counter, scribbled something, and tore out a page. She slid it across to me without meeting my eyes. The paper read, "Leave before Friday." It was Tuesday. I laughed nervously, but the sound fell flat in the empty diner. Shirley didn't laugh back. That night I sat in the kitchen, lights off, staring through the window. At 2:13, a knock rattled the wall just beneath the sill. Not the door, the wall. Just one sharp tap, like a knuckle testing would. Then silence. Footsteps circled the trailer, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves in a wide loop. Every few steps, another knock. Always low on the wall, as though whoever it was wanted to hear the hollow echo beneath. At dawn, 3 more ropes had appeared overnight. One looped neatly around the hood of my car. Another tied to the antenna. A third fastened to the trailer step, bound not perfect. I called Ellis. This time he answered. "There are ropes all over the place," I said. "What's happening?" Long silence. Then, "They've picked you." "Who?" "The hollow chooses," he said. "Always has. Used to take locals. Then the old families left. Now it takes outsiders. Happens every few years." Before I could speak again, he hung up. I packed. My duffel was already half ready, and I crammed everything else in. I tried the car. Dead. Wouldn't even click. My phone too, screen black though it had been charged. I walked into town, but the diner was locked, shades drawn. The gas station boarded. Even the church stood empty, its door cracked just enough to let me slip in. Inside, there were no pews, no altar. Just a pit dug into the floor. Freshly turned dirt. Around the walls, 12 ropes hung from nails, each one tied in the same perfect loop. The air stank of damp clay, and something older, bitterer. I bolted back to the trailer. That night, the knock started earlier, 1:45, and harder. Not gentle taps now. Pounding. Dozens of fists hammering the walls in unison, rattling the thin metal frame. The whole trailer shook as though it might buckle. I scrambled into the bathroom and locked the door, crouching on the linoleum with the crowbar clutched tight. Then I heard it. Footsteps above me. Not on the roof, on the ceiling. Bare feet pacing slow, measured. Back and forth. My teeth rattled against each other. At 2:23, everything stopped. Dead silence. I stayed in that bathroom until morning. When I finally opened the front door, a rope was tied to the handle. Inside the loop was a scrap of paper. My own handwriting stared back at me. Words I had never written. Friday. Your turn. I didn't wait. My car started on the first try. My phone lit up, as though nothing had happened. I drove without stopping until I hit Charleston, shaking so hard I could barely keep the wheel straight. But here's the part one don't tell anyone. Every night since, at exactly 2:11, my phone buzzes. No caller ID, no voicemail, just a vibration that doesn't stop until I pick it up. When I do, there's only silence. Except sometimes, if I hold my breath long enough, I swear I can hear footsteps. Slow, barefoot, pacing back and forth just above me. And last night, for the first time, the rope appeared again, draped neatly across my apartment balcony rail, loop tied tight and waiting. I never planned on going back to the mountains. I left West Virginia when I was 19, caught a bus to Pittsburgh with $50 and a duffel bag, and swore I'd never step foot in that part of the state again. The valleys had always felt like traps, too steep, too shadowed, too full of old names that circled like buzzards. But you don't get to choose when family pulls you back. My father died in February. At least, that's when they found him. The sheriff said he was slumped in his recliner by the front window, television still glowing blue. No one knew how long he'd been like that. The neighbors in Ashford Hollow, what few were left, hadn't seen him in weeks. When the sheriff called me, he used the same flat tone he probably used for deer strikes and DUI arrests. "You'll need to come down," he said. "Sort the house. Only you left on record. I teach journalism now in Columbus. My life is neat measured. I'm divorced, childless, the kind of man who reads weather reports before grocery runs. Going back felt like walking into a photograph where the colors had drained away. My younger sister, Claire, agreed to meet me there. She works at an animal hospital outside Indianapolis. She hadn't been home since her graduation, and even over the phone I could hear how tightly she was wound. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Ivy smothered the siding. One window was boarded over, the porch sagged under years of neglect, and the screen door hung half off its hinges. Inside, the smell hit like a wall, mildew, motor oil, and something sweet rotting beneath it, like fruit boiled down to syrup and left to burn. We spent the first 2 days just trying to clear enough space to move around. Dad had been hoarding, newspapers stacked chest high, boxes of screws, busted radios, coffee cans full of rusted nails. Claire kept muttering that her skin itched. At one point she stopped in the hallway, turned in a slow circle, and said, "This house is looking back." I laughed because silence felt heavier than admitting she was right. On the third day I crawled under the kitchen sink to fix a leak and pulled out a mason jar shoved behind old bleach bottles. The glass was sticky with a film I didn't want to touch. The lid was rusted, but inside was a key, taped neatly to the glass. A faded label was stuck to the jar, edges yellowed but the handwriting sharp. "Stonebridge Mill, don't." The words made my stomach clench. The mill was 3 miles north, near the bend in the river where the bridge washed out years ago. People said it had burned during a storm back in the 60s. Some blamed lightning, others said arson. Adults never agreed on the details, and if you asked too many questions, they'd tell you to mind your own. Claire remembered once, she must have been 5, Dad drove us out there. He parked at the fence line, stood with both hands on the wheel, and stared at the structure without saying a word. She said he didn't even blink. That night I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not rats, not pipes. It was pressure, rhythmic, dragging beneath the floorboards, as though something heavy was pulling itself along on elbows. I stood barefoot in the living room, waiting, but nothing appeared. The next morning I found them, bare footprints in the dirt leading from the woods to the side of the house. Long, narrow, toes curled downward like claws gripping earth. No heel marks. Not human, but close enough to unsettle every instinct in me. I showed Claire. She didn't argue. She grabbed her jacket and waited by the truck, not wanting me to go alone but unwilling to speak the thought. We followed the trail through thickets and bramble until the trees thinned and the mill appeared. It was a ruin, brick walls charred black, metal beams jutting from the earth like broken bones. Yet the door stood untouched, closed tight, secured with a gleaming padlock that couldn't have been older than a year. I pulled the jar key from my pocket. Claire stepped back. The key slid in perfectly. The padlock snapped open. The air inside dropped 10 degrees. Not cold enough to fog breath, but sharp, metallic cold that settled into bone. The smell hit next: wet stone, old timber, and something cooked too long, like meat left on a fire until it turned to leather. The main floor had collapsed into a shallow pit. I shined my flashlight down. At first I thought the ground was littered with mannequins. Then I saw they were arranged, rows of figures seated cross-legged, unmoving. Their skin looked stretched too thin, gray and veined, mouths torn into wide, slack O's. Eyes open, glossy, fixed, staring straight ahead as if waiting for someone to speak. I didn't breathe, didn't speak, just backed away and relocked the door. Claire didn't ask what I saw. She must have read it on my face. That night I wrapped the key in one of Dad's flannel shirts and hurled it into the creek. Claire called a clean-out company, told them we wouldn't be there when they arrived. We packed fast. The plan was simple: leave before sunrise, don't look back. But plans collapse at night in Ashford Hollow. I was half asleep on the couch when I felt weight against the front door. Not knocking, leaning. Testing. I held the knob tight, pressed my back against the wood. The pressure stayed, steady as a tide, until the sky grayed with morning. Outside, more footprints circled the house. Not just one set, dozens, all sizes, forming a perfect ring. Claire didn't make coffee. She shoved her bags in the car and started the engine before I was even buckled in Dad's truck. We left together, me ahead, her sedan close behind. We'd barely reached the county line when my phone buzzed. Claire's voice was ragged. "There's something in the back seat," she whispered. "Don't stop," I said. "Don't turn around. Just keep driving." In my mirror I caught it. Something hunched low in her back seat. Pale. Bent wrong, as if made of wet paper folded into the shape of a man. My blood iced. Then I smelled it, rot and rust filling my own cab. I spun in my seat. A shape crouched behind me, knees up to its chest, head cocked too far sideways. Its eyes were empty hollows. I slammed the brakes, rammed my shoulder against the door until it flew open, and tumbled onto the gravel. When I scrambled back up, the seat was empty, but the smell lingered, thick as a bruise. We drove until we hit a roadside motel 30 miles out. Took separate rooms. We didn't speak. By morning, Claire was gone. Her car missing. No note. I found it later that day, 3 miles down an old service road, engine cold, doors ajar. Her suitcase still in the trunk. Bare footprints trailed from the driver's side into the trees. Long, curling toes. Straight toward Stonebridge Mill. I followed. The door hung open now, padlock discarded in the dirt. Inside, the figures sat just as before, except one. Brown hair spilling down her shoulders. Eyes open, glassy, unblinking. Claire. I didn't scream. Didn't even cry. I just backed out, climbed into the truck, and drove until the highway blurred. That was 6 months ago. I've moved 4 times since. Always rentals. Never ground floors. I thought distance might matter. It doesn't. Every night, just after 2, I hear them again. Floorboards creaking slow, deliberate. Pressure against the door. A weight leaning in. Sometimes I see the footprints outside, bare, curled, pressed into concrete where no prints should be. And last week, I woke to the smell again. Sweet rot, cooked down until it clung to the walls. In the reflection of my television, I saw a row of figures behind me, sitting patiently in the dark. When I turned, nothing was there. But I know how this ends. The mill doesn't stay in Ashford Hollow. It carries itself with the ones who leave, waiting until they're tired enough, desperate enough, or careless enough to open the door again. And one night, when I can no longer tell the silence from my own heartbeat, I'll find myself walking back to it, key or no key. Because the hollow doesn't need locks. It only needs patience, and it has more than I ever will. I was 33 when I moved back to a part of Tennessee I never planned to see again. Dunn Hollow, that's where my grandfather lived, if you could call what he did. Living, he raised goats and stared at trees for most of the day, didn't say. Much unless he'd been drinking, and even then it wasn't really talking so much as muttering things that felt like they weren't for anyone else. I'd left Dunn Hollow when I was 18 and swore I wouldn't go back, but you know how life Goes 1 minute you've got a job, a lease, and plans, and the next you're sleeping. In your car wondering if eating peanut butter with a spoon counts as dinner after getting laid off and burning. Through my savings, I remembered the house my uncle left behind when he died. No one in the family wanted it, they barely mentioned it. It was out past Maynard Ridge, tucked into a thicket, where even the deer looked confused, so I moved in. The place was exactly what you'd expect: sagging roof, peeling paint, a porch that felt like it might give up if you looked at it wrong, but it was free, and it had walls. First few days were quiet. I unpacked, fixed what I could, tried to make it feel like I wasn't squatting in some forgotten shack, but the silence out there wasn't restful. It was the kind of silence that made you think you were missing something, like a song cutting out before the chorus. I kept hearing the floor creak when I wasn't walking, and the walls, they made these popping sounds, sharp and sudden, like something shifting on the other side. I told myself it was just an old house. I said that out loud a few times, too, hoping maybe if I said it enough I'd believe it. The second night, I was 35 when I ended up on Raven Hollow Road, and I wasn't there for adventure. I wasn't some curious hiker or city kid chasing folklore. I was a schoolteacher on leave, burned out after 10 years of grading essays about the Boston Tea Party and breaking up cafeteria fights. A friend of mine from grad school had inherited some backwoods property outside of Logan County, West Virginia, and he offered me the old family place while I cleared my head. I said yes because the rent was free, and because I didn't think I had the strength to face my own apartment anymore. The house sat at the end of a gravel road that climbed until my self-service dropped to a single bar, then disappeared. It was a squat one-story ranch built in the 50s, with peeling paint and a porch that sagged like tired shoulders. The woods pressed tight on all sides, thick with tulip, poplar, and oak. Even in midday, the light struggled to reach the dirt. The first week was uneventful. I filled the silence with books, fixed what I could around the place, and tried to convince myself that solitude was a cure and not another kind of poison. But the second week, something shifted. One night, around 11, I was outside on the porch trying to coax a signal out of my phone. I'd learned that if I stood in the far corner of the top step and held the phone sideways like a water witch's rod, I could sometimes send a text. I was balancing there when movement snagged the corner of my vision. Near the tree-line, maybe 30 yards out, something rose up. It wasn't like a deer rearing or a bear standing. This was practiced, deliberate, like it had risen that way 1,000 times before. The shape was wrong, too tall, limbs jointed in ways that made my stomach roll. I held perfectly still, phone forgotten. The thing didn't approach. Instead, in one unnervingly smooth motion, it dropped to all fours and slipped back into the dark. I stayed on the porch until my legs ached from standing. When I finally went inside, I locked every door and window, then dragged a chair under the knob, even though the warped frame made the effort laughable. The next morning I walked into Briar Fork, the nearest town. 2 miles of rutted dirt road led me into a place that looked like it had been abandoned a decade ago, but hadn't gotten the memo. The diner was open, though, so I sat at the counter and ordered coffee, just to remind myself I was human. The woman behind the counter was maybe in her 60s, gray hair knotted tight, hands that had worked every kind of job. When I asked if there were hiking trails nearby, she narrowed her eyes and said, "Not around here. Closest is 12 miles out." "You sure?" I pressed. "Thought I saw someone in the woods last night. Big. Strange looking." She didn't blink. "Panther, maybe. We've had sightings." "Panther that stands upright?" She didn't answer. Just refilled my cup until it overflowed and walked away. That night I couldn't shake the unease. I pulled an old tire iron from the shed and sat in bed with the flashlight angled toward the window. Around 2 in the morning, the roof groaned. Slow, deliberate steps moved from one end of the house to the other. I held my breath, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Then came a scraping, long and metallic, as though claws dragged across shingles. A heavy thump shook the wall, then another. The sound of something leaping down. I crept into the kitchen and peered through the window. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the certainty that something lingered just beyond the light. I turned off every lamp and crouched near the back door, tire iron across my lap. For the next hour, I listened to faint movement outside, leaves shifting, dirt pressed under weight. At one point, something brushed against the siding. Then a single tap against the wall beneath the window. One knuckle, deliberate. That was worse than any scream. I didn't sleep until sunrise, When I finally stepped outside, I checked the shed, for claw marks slashed down the door, starting high, too high for a man to reach, and running to the dirt. In the ground were grooves, not quite footprints, more like something had dragged itself forward on limbs too long for its own body. I drove into town again, this time to the sheriff's office. A deputy listened as I told him everything. He didn't take notes. When I asked if others had reported similar things, he shook his head. "You're staying up by Raven Hollow Ridge?" he asked finally. I nodded, his gaze fixed on mine, flat and unblinking. "Then don't go outside after dark." That was all. He stood and walked into another room, leaving me alone. That night I set up a trail camera I'd found in the shed, motion-activated infrared. I aimed it toward the porch, checked the batteries twice, cleared the memory card. At 11, the power cut out. Not a flicker, gone like someone had yanked the cord from the wall. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The line sagged in the dirt, ripped clean from the box. Not cut, ripped. The siding was bent as if someone had gripped the cable and torn until metal surrendered. I retreated inside, lit a lantern and waited. Around 2, the voices started. Not shouting, whispering. Dozens of them, fast and sharp, not English or any language I recognized. They came from the trees, moved closer, surrounded the house. Then one rose above the rest. Clear, deliberate. My name. Daniel. Not screamed, not taunted. Spoken, as if someone stood at the edge of the yard and called me to supper. I froze. My breath stuttered loud in my chest. Again the voice, Daniel. I backed away from the window, sat with my spine against the wall, tire iron clutched so tight my palms bled. The whispers continued until dawn. When the sun finally cut through the trees, I grabbed the camera and loaded the card. 3 clips. The first, me walking into the house. The second, triggered motion, nothing visible but static. The third, a face. Pressed so close the lens warped. Skin pale, stretched tight, no hair, no brows. Mouth open too wide, teeth blunt and flat like they'd been filed. Eyes enormous, black, set too far apart. It stared straight into the camera for 4 full seconds before vanishing. I left the house that day, packed a single bag, drove west toward Clark County where a friend lived. I didn't explain much, just that I needed a place to crash. Within a month, I sold the property through a lawyer, never met the buyer, never asked questions. But leaving didn't end it. The first night in Clark County, I woke at 2:11 to a sound on the roof. Slow steps, deliberate. A scrape across shingles. A heavy thump. Then silence. I told myself it was memory, the echo of stress, nothing more. But the next morning, I found grooves in the dirt behind the garage. 2 weeks later, my friend found me sitting on the floor by the back door, tire iron in my lap. He asked what the hell I was doing. I told him I couldn't explain. Last month, I moved again. Apartment this time. City lights. People on all sides. Noise to drown silence. And still, every night around 2, the whispers come. Not outside anymore. Inside. Sometimes they circle the ceiling. Sometimes they crowd the bathroom tiles. And sometimes, when the lamp flickers, they all speak at once. Fast, sharp, hungry, before one voice rises above the others, clear as church bells. It calls my name. And lately, it's been calling yours too. I was 22 when I started working nights for a man named Calder Boone. He owned a salvage yard outside of Harlow Gap, Virginia, a place so far into the ridges that the road and looked more like a logging path than anything meant for cars. The county didn't bother paving it, and GPS stopped working the minute you turned off the highway. I had just dropped out of community college, convinced I'd never make rent without taking whatever job I could. Calder paid cash and didn't ask questions. He barely looked at me the first day, just counted out 20s and said, "Night shifts only. Keep the gates closed. Keep quiet. Don't wander the yard." His eyes were like dull marbles, gray and unblinking, and when he pressed the bills into my hand his fingers shook in a way that felt too steady to be nerves. The trailer where I stayed during shifts looked half buried in the gravel, windows crooked, one door swollen so badly you had to shoulder it open. Inside was a couch that smelled faintly of varnish and mildew, a hot plate, a mini fridge that rattled like it was full of rocks, and an old Winchester rifle leaning in the corner. Calder tapped it once with his knuckle and said, "Just in case." I told myself it was only a junkyard job, Harlow Gap was the sort of place where everyone remembered who your grandparents had been but pretended not to notice when people vanished. It was a good spot to disappear quietly. Maybe that's why Calder lived out there, in a shack behind the office with no electricity, but a lantern glow that never seemed to go out. The first night, I walked the fence with a flashlight like he told me. The yard sprawled across several acres, rows of wrecked cars stacked 2 and 3 high, their windshields black with grime. My light bounced off chrome and glass, and once I thought I saw a face in a rearview mirror only to realize it was my own reflection stretched by the angle. There was one bus that bothered me more than the rest. An old church vehicle with shattered windows. In the grill was a stuffed rabbit, wedged upside down. The first time I walked past, it looked stuck in place. The second time, I could have sworn its ears were turned toward me. By the third round, the crickets went silent when I neared it. Not faded, silent, as if sound itself refused to pass that patch of dirt. I stayed up the entire night with the rifle balanced across my lap. The silence was worse than any noise. The second night, I heard footsteps. Not coyotes, not raccoons. Human footsteps crunching gravel, slow, measured. I shouted through the door. "Who's there?" Nothing. When I scanned the yard with my light, I saw only wreckage and shadows. But the footsteps had been real. I could still feel the vibrations in the soles of my boots. The third night, the walkie buzzed. Calder had given me one, said he'd keep the other in his shack. Static hissed, then a pop, like someone had tapped the mic and let go. No voice. No explanation. I stared at it until I shut it off. The next morning, Calder didn't ask me what I'd heard. He just slid a second clip of bullets across the counter. "If anything comes to the door, don't open it. Wait it out. If you step outside, you're not covered." I asked what he meant. He looked at me too long, lips barely moving, when he said, "Not people you should be worried about." I laughed because silence pressed harder when I didn't. He didn't laugh with me. After that, I stopped leaving the trailer at night. I barricaded the door with a chair. I slept sitting up, rifle across my knees. That's when the sounds began. Not footsteps this time, scraping metal, low thuds, the shuffle of something dragging itself across hoods and fenders. Always between 2 and 3 in the morning. One night, something knocked. Just once. Sharp. Enough to make sure I heard it. When I finally opened the door with the rifle raised, nothing was there. Nothing but dirt. But in the dirt, directly below the step, were footprints. Bare. Toes too long. 1 foot with 6. No tracks leading to them, none leaving. I stumbled backward, vision swimming. The prints looked pressed into the earth as if something had simply arrived, then disappeared. The next morning, Calder handed me a set of keys to the gate. His expression didn't change when I told him about the prints. He just said, "If you see it, don't move. Don't speak. It gets confused if you're still." "What gets confused?" I asked. He looked at me with those marble eyes and said nothing. I should have quit. I didn't. Nights blurred together after that. Sometimes I caught flickers of movement between rows of cars, low shapes crawling, or something hunched with elbows bent too far backward, slipping from shadow to shadow. I never saw a face, but I felt watched. Felt it like a weight pressed between my eyes. Once, I dozed off for less than a minute. When I woke, the trailer door was wide open. The rifle was gone. Panic jolted me upright, heart hammering. I searched the trailer, found the rifle leaning against the fridge. The clip was missing. From then on, I kept the bullets in my pocket. I didn't trust the gun anymore. 3 nights later, I found every hood in the central aisle popped open. Perfectly neat. Engines gutted. No wires, no grease, nothing. Just clean, empty cavities. As though something had fed from one car to the next, crawling down the line. Calder didn't show up for 2 mornings in a row. I left notes on his shack. On the 3rd morning, I opened the door myself. The place was stripped bare. No dishes, no clothes, only a mattress stained black in the corner. In the sink was a pile of charred photographs. School pictures, mostly. The faces melted and warped as though whoever burned them couldn't stand to look. That night, I stopped pretending I would ever sleep. I kept my eyes on the yard until a shape moved between 2 stacked vans. It crouched low, elbows bending backward like insect legs, arms too long for its frame. Its head tilted to the side, slow and deliberate, as if listening. I couldn't see features, but I felt it focus on me. My skin went cold, temples throbbing. The walkie crackled again. I almost didn't touch it, but my hand moved on its own. What came through wasn't static this time. It was breathing. Long, drawn-out breaths, so close it felt like someone's mouth was pressed against my ear. I snapped it off and sat in the dark until dawn. The sheriff came after I called Calder missing. He looked around the shack, barely glanced at the photographs, and told me it sounded like I'd had a bad dream. He filed a short report. A week later, the yard was chained up and abandoned. I left Harlow Gap that October and moved east to lay fiber lines in Richmond. I told myself I'd never think of Calder Boone or his yard again. But last winter, an envelope showed up at my apartment. No return address. Just a single photograph inside. It was me. 17 nights into that job, asleep on the trailer couch, mouth slack, rifle across my lap. In the window's reflection behind me, 2 pale hands pressed against the glass. Fingers long, knuckles stretched, skin like paper. Spread wide. No face. Just the hands. My name is Jonah, and I was 19 the summer I came back to Cinder Trace, a coal patch hollow in southern West Virginia that had been shrinking for as long as anyone could remember. My parents left when I was small, but my aunt still lived there, and she let me crash in her spare room while I worked part-time at a hardware store in town. I told myself it was only for a season, just long enough to save money before transferring colleges, but deep down I knew I'd been drawn back by something heavier. Homesickness mixed with guilt that I couldn't name. Cinder Trace wasn't even on most maps anymore. The old company store had collapsed, the schoolhouse was boarded, and the church stood tilted on its foundation, clapboards grayed to the color of bone. My cousin Eli was the only one my age left in town. He was a year younger than me, cocky, always carrying a chipped pocket knife and talking bigger than he was. If I was cautious, Eli was reckless. If I wanted to walk away, he wanted to pry the door open. Most nights we ended up at the abandoned St. Michael's Church, sitting on the steps, smoking cheap cigarettes, listening to the creek trickle through culverts that hadn't been cleared in decades. The graveyard behind the church stretched into the woods, crooked stones leaning at odd angles, names worn away until they were nothing but grooves. It was there, in early September, that Eli stumbled across the cellar. He'd been kicking through the underbrush when his foot caught a buried ring of iron. He swore, bent down, and brushed away the leaves. Underneath was a pair of thick planks, half-rotted, set flush into the ground. A door. "Bet this is where the priests hid their whiskey," Eli said, grinning. I crouched beside him. The soil around the edges was sunken, as though it had been lifted and dropped countless times before being forgotten. When Eli yanked on the ring, the wood groaned like something old and reluctant, but it opened. Beneath, a stairway descended into blackness. I waited for the smell of damp earth, mildew, maybe carrion. But there was nothing, not even the faint dust rot of basements. It was a blankness that made my throat tighten, like air itself had been scraped away. Eli was ready to go down immediately, but I stopped him. "Not without a real light," I said. He rolled his eyes, but agreed. That night, after my aunt fell asleep, I slipped out and met Eli at the back fence line. He carried a kerosene lantern his father had kept in the barn. The flame hissed when he lit it, casting greasy light through thick glass. We didn't speak as we walked. The woods at night were foreign, branches clawing together overhead, every sound sharp and close. The cellar door was still open when we arrived. It looked almost expectant. Eli raised the lantern, and we descended. The steps were stone all the way, worn smooth in the middle. The walls wept moisture that glistened in the light. At the bottom was a room no larger than a bedroom. The floor wasn't dirt or concrete, but something packed and hard, almost polished, like clay shaped by deliberate hands. At the center stood a single stone chest, rectangular, waist-high, covered in carvings that twisted and overlapped until the eye couldn't follow. Spirals that bled into claws, thorns that broke into bone shapes. It was frantic, obsessive, as if whoever cut the stone had been trapped with nothing but time and fever in their head. Eli grinned at me. "Looks like a treasure box." I grabbed his sleeve. Maybe we shouldn't. But he was already sliding the lid. The scrape of stone on stone was dry, final. Inside wasn't treasure. It was hair. Coiled braids of human hair, blackened with age, knotted with faded threads. Some strands still clung to patches of brittle scalp. Others were singed, ends curled like they'd been near fire. Layer upon layer, packed tight as if preserved. I gagged. Eli reached in before I could stop him. His fingers brushed the braids. The lantern flared so bright it flooded the chamber, then sputtered back to a weak glow. The shadows afterward felt heavier, pressing in as if the light itself had recoiled. The lid slipped and cracked against the edge, refusing to shut clean. For a heartbeat, the mass of hair seemed to shift, like something stirring beneath it. We fled. Neither of us spoke until we reached the road. Then Eli said, voice flat, "It was just hair." I didn't answer. That night I left every light burning in my aunt's house. I lay awake until morning painted the curtains gray. Eli didn't come to town the next day. His mother said he had chills, couldn't get warm. When I biked to his house, he was huddled under quilts, skin ashen, lips cracked. His hands shook violently when he lifted a glass of water. "It's not fever," he whispered. "The cold's inside." I tried to reassure him, but the way his eyes darted to the corner of the room made my stomach knot. By dawn the following morning, Eli was gone. No note, no tracks, boots still by the door. His mother wept until she couldn't breathe. The sheriff scribbled a few lines in a notebook and muttered that boys run off all the time. I went back to the cellar. The door was shut now. When I lifted it, the steps felt darker, as if they swallowed the lantern light. At the bottom, the stone chest lay shattered. The braids were gone. The floorboard prints pressed deep into the clay. Not human. Four-toed long, the tips ending in sharp points. I stumbled backward, while rising in my throat, and scrambled up the steps. That night, tapping woke me. At first I thought it was branches, but the rhythm was too steady. Tap, 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 against my bedroom window. I told myself not to look, but I did. Eli stood outside, or what was left of him. His skin was pulled too tight, his eyes hollow pits that glimmered faintly. His lips moved without sound, but then a whisper crept through the glass, thin as breath. "It's still hungry." Then he turned, shoulders jerking in unnatural rhythm, and walked into the trees. I didn't sleep again. Weeks passed. I tried to bury it under routine, under the dull work of stacking shelves and sweeping floors. But every so often I'd find strands of hair where they shouldn't be, coiled around my doorknob, braided into the handle of the fridge, caught between the pages of my notebook. Always black, threaded with faded red. I left Cinder Trace before winter. Told my aunt I needed to get back to school, though we both knew I wasn't going back. I moved 3 towns over, found work in a warehouse, avoided calls from home. But last month, a package came. No return address. Inside was a small bundle, tied with thread. I already knew what was inside before I opened it. Braids of black hair. When I touched them, the chills spread immediately, creeping through my veins, hollowing me from within. That night, the tapping returned. This time it wasn't at the window. It came from under the floor. And I know, sooner or later, when I can't keep still anymore, when the cold fills me completely, I'll climb down to where the chest once stood. I'll take my place with whatever walks those steps now, because hunger never dies in Cinder Trace. It just waits for the next fool who can't keep the door shut. I was 31 when a county hazard mitigation grant brought me to Stonevine Ridge, the kind of North Carolina backcountry that swallows a radio signal like a seed hull. My job, boring on paper, steadier than anything I'd done in years, was to map abandoned homestead wells, springs, and sinkholes along the Unicoi front. I'm a GIS contractor with an environmental firm out of Asheville. I spend most days coaxing old parcel maps into modern layers, flagging places where a forgotten hole might break an ankle or take a child. The grant paid well enough that I rented a month of quiet in a cedarboard cabin outside the hamlet of Spindle Creek, where the road gives up its pretense and becomes ruts between rhododendron hedges, and where the mountains look like an animal rolling over in its sleep. The cabin belonged to a beekeeper named Keeler. He had the look of a man weathered by salt and wind even this far inland. Scar down the cheek, hands like bark, a way of talking that made you lean in because volume wasn't part of his repertoire. He handed me a ring of keys, a list of do's and don'ts, and the kind of Appalachian warning that gets phrased like common sense. Don't block the creek culvert, don't forget to latch the goat gate, and don't lean over any stone rings you didn't build yourself. He said it without humor, eyes on the timberline, as if someone he hated was standing there. I'd heard stranger rules. Dorm roommates had taped excess over webcam lenses. My grandma used to cross knives under the crib. I nodded, took the keys, and rolled my duffel inside. In daylight, nothing looked worth superstition. Hemlocks shouldered up against oak and poplar, laurel thickets tunneled skinny deer paths, and the ridge threw a long shadow into a bottomland that smelled like iron and cold leaves. The cabin was simple. One room split by a chimney, a sleeping loft, a broken radio whose dial turned without changing the song of static, and a barn that leaned so hard to the south it seemed brave to stand under it. I set my bike in the barn anyway, tied it to a beam out of habit, and ducked down to the root cellar beneath when rain pinned me there. It was cool and damp, the dirt tamped to clay by generations of footsteps. Work started the next morning. My firm had printed out a stack of orthophoto tiles with property line overlays, and I walked the lines with a GPS handset and a clipboard, ticking off where old homesteads had sat by the sure signs. Stone scatter, feral lilac, daffodils blooming in straight rows where no person lived anymore. The first week, every hole I logged was ordinary. Old dug wells with concrete caps, springs that had gone to mud, cisterns collapsed with a tidy geometry that pleased the part of me that wants the world to stack and label cleanly. I texted friends photos of my boots hung with burrs and joked about earning laurel hell pay. I slept like a rock. It changed the day I found the ring. I wasn't looking for it. I was rolling the bike around the barn when the ground betrayed me. My right foot sank with a sickening give, and my knee cracked into stone. By the time I'd sworn the kind of ridiculous string that belongs in a cartoon, I'd hauled myself out and looked down. A ring of stones, old granite, lichen scabbed, sat half buried in mats of vine. There was no cap, no bucket, no rusted crank, only a clean round mouth maybe 4 feet across. The smell that came up wasn't the moss cool of spring water, or the sour rot of stagnant wet. It was old dirt and something else, a shut-in odor like a closet sealed decades and only now breathed through. It made the soft palate at the back of my throat twitch. I stepped back because instinct is ancestry given another name. Keeler came by at dusk to check his hives. I mentioned the ring. He didn't stop what he was doing, just slid a frame heavy with bees back into the body and said, without looking at me, should have stayed buried. What was it? I asked, but he gave me the beekeeper's shrug you learn means he likes you enough not to lie. That night the dreams started. Falling dreams first, then the tooth grinds and late for exam failures that feel like your brain cleaning itself crudely. But by the fourth night my dreaming wasn't borrowed. I was walking barefoot in a wood that looked like mine marred. The trees stood too tall and too close, like pilings in a drowned town. There was no wind, but the canopy shifted in slow, listening movements, and a voice just under the wavelength of words hissed along the dead leaves. Not loud enough to parse, only enough to be sure it was not wind. I couldn't speak. When I woke, there was dirt under my nails and leaf crumbs between my toes. I don't sleepwalk. I told myself I do now. I wedged a chair under the door handle and ran paracord from the bedroom knob to a boulder on the porch like any of it would matter. I propped myself up with old paperbacks from the cabin shelves. Western novels where men drink their mistakes and someone gets called Pecos without explanation, and watched the window go dark like a theater curtain. At some point I convinced myself I had made it through, and then at 2:30 I heard steps. Not boots, not goats. Weight set down and dragged like someone relearning walking. They stopped outside my door and stood a long time. The knocking, when it came, was 5 even notes, knuckles to wood, polite as a salesman. Breath followed, steady, measured, close enough I could count it if I were that kind of fool. In the morning there were no prints on the porch. Dust on the floorboards inside lay undisturbed. I told Keeler at breakfast, and he looked at his plate like the baked beans might give him the line he wanted. It remembers, he said finally. What does? I tried. He pinched the bridge of his nose and found some part of kindness. There used to be a rule. Old people said it plain. Don't trade breaths with the hollow. You look down a ring like that, and you'll want to talk to yourself. Don't. First breath wakes it. Second breath gives it the way you're put together. After that it can stand up in you. That's folklore, I said, not out of disbelief, but because naming it that makes it feel like a jacket you can shrug off. He hammered 2 boards across my bedroom door from the hall anyway. If it calls you by name, you don't answer. You don't breathe deep. You let yourself be rude. It was easy to obey when daylight lay on the floor. At night, the mind doesn't care about board feel rules. At 3:13, this I began to expect. The floor in the far corner lifted like breath. Not high, enough to show the nailheads think about what they are. There followed the sound of wood varnished by time trying to flex, and being asked to pretend it could. Then there were fingers. They weren't corpse fingers. I've seen dead hands. My summer job between college semesters was with a disaster cleanup company, and a hand that's been gone too long gets waxen and quiet. These were too busy for death. The skin was wrong. Swollen where it should be knuckled, splinter thin where pads should fatten. The nails were the color of old ivory and too long, and they found the seams between boards the way water does, pushing, testing the way of least resistance, as if old intelligence had to rehearse. My body did what bodies do. Every nerve in my back told my shoulders to arch, my mouth went dry, and my breath wanted to show itself. The thing at the floor knew it. The boards rose a fraction, and between them something looked up at me. It was almost a face, if a face had been drawn by someone who had only felt a skull and guessed wrong where to drape the rest. It didn't open its mouth. It didn't need to. I understood what it meant the way you understand threat without language. It wanted me, because I had leaned over its mouth and taken a breath like we were trading favors. Keeler had left his old Pulaski by the stove for chopping kindling. I lifted it slow, as if slowness mattered, and brought the flat of it hard down where the boards swelled. The sound was thunder in a small room. For a half-second the thing resisted the way meat, and would resist. And then it was gone, the sound of whatever stood under me folding itself thin like paper and easing back. The floor lay flat. Sawdust danced in my lantern light like gnats that had waited their cue. In the morning the boards weren't scuffed. If you've ever bitten your tongue and then tried to show someone, you know the helplessness of evidence that refuses to perform. Keeler saw the look on my face and didn't ask for proof. He brought the dig bar and the dolly and the wheelbarrow, and we walked to the stone ring. He didn't speak. He had that set of jaw you see in men driving family behind the body to a cemetery. We fed the ring with anything heavy we could find. River rock, bricks from the back stoop, an axle that had no business being on a mountain. The rim disappeared rock by rock. When it was gone, he tamped soil and leaf mold in layers, a fieldman's dirt cake, and laid fence rails over it like the lid of something that shouldn't have a lid. You never poured concrete? I asked when we stopped to breathe like people again. He shook his head. Nothing likes concrete, but men who don't have to dig it up. I went back to work because invoices don't pay themselves and maps have a way of being kinder than days. My GPS tracked my loops through Laurel Hell. I placed flagged stakes beside privy pits and cisterns. I ate peanut butter on a stump and thought about rationalization like it was protein. On my way back I stopped at the Spindle Creek Diner because I needed the clatter and music of plates. The woman behind the counter looked like every diner woman worth trusting. Apron bleached too many times, hair in a gray loop that meant business. She poured coffee without asking. When I told her about mapping old wells, she set the pot down and said a sentence like a weather report. Don't whistle near holes. Why? I asked, out of anthropological habit. Because it answers, she said, and I realized 30 counties share one grandmother. Keeler hammered no more boards across my door. He added a second lock and a length of chain. The nights were quiet for 2 days. On the third, a voice said my name just past the window glass. It wasn't a trickster voice, no sanitarium giggle or guttural nonsense, but my name in a tone that had learned it laterally, as if it had listened to a husband say it through teeth. It asked me to let it help me. I held my breath until the lights behind my eyes made their own stars. The next week my work took me up along a ridge west of the cabin, and I watched a hawk prove the difference between gliding and falling. The first has intent, the second only gravity. I destroyed my phone battery taking pictures of persimmons and fungi, because living leaves you greedy for proof of it. I was happy for the first time in days. On the way back, the bees from Keeler's hive swarmed my porch screen door, their bodies like commas in a sentence I could not read. I paused. The hiss of them was high and thick. When I reached to unlatch the door, the swarm moved in the shape of a breath drawn in. At 2:13 a.m. my bedroom filled with the honey-sour smell of their bodies. I heard a sound as small as a pin tapping glass, and then the glass throbbed like a fish bowl. The bees formed my name. It was not superstition. They moved in OS and NS in lines, the bulges in the swarm spelling the 5 letters I was born to answer to. A word in insects. The Pulaski was too heavy to swing at a swarm, and too stupid even if you could. I put my palm against the glass because human error is also a kind of ritual. The bees parted perfectly along my handprint, and behind them the dark rippled like something shallow. The next day I tried to pour concrete. The ready-mix bags were light in my hands and heavier on my conscience. Keeler let me be stubborn until it cost him nothing. He set a bucket by the stone ring and walked away so I could admit what the day had already told me. The hole had moved. We had sealed one mouth. The quarry had others. I took days in town to research because that is the only tool I trust more than my legs. The county library had 2 cabinets of microfilm dating back to the 1890s and a librarian who's been handed more deaths than the sheriff. She watched me spool through faded columns with the focus of a woman who remembers when roads were promises. I found what I always find in old papers: floods written like relatives, men dying being called accidents, women named by who they belonged to, and a line in 1911 that stopped me. The hushing well behind the Wickersham place was filled today according to old instructions following the winter of odd ailments. The Reverend T. Condor refused comment. Mercy Wickersham was seen with her mouth stitched but no thread. I laughed because it was the wrong reaction, and the librarian, who had learned how people swallow fear, let me keep it. On my way out she pressed a microcassette into my palm and said, "Field recording from a folklorist in the 70s. He asked my aunt about the well that took her brother. She wouldn't add her voice to that hole, but she let him leave his. You might like to have a man in your pocket who isn't afraid." We buried another mouth that afternoon, not because burying works, but because the body needs a task or it invents worse ones. We carried rock until our hands remembered being children. We tamped. We didn't talk about mercy with thread. The next night I was careful about the shape of my breathing. I counted to 5, not aloud, not with the rhythm the knocking wanted to make of me, but in a pattern I made ugly on purpose. I didn't look at the window. When the voice asked for my second breath, I laughed like the librarian had and hated myself for it, and the thing behind my door hissed like someone learning to say fine and mean not yet. 2 days later my firm called to move me to a project in Transylvania County. It felt like being rescued by a dull angel. I packed, left the keys where Keeler would find them, and drove away at noon so the mountain couldn't see my taillights want to check a mirror. I lasted a week in Brevard before the first package came. It was a small padded mailer with no return address, a smear of clay on the corner like a thumbprint. Inside was a glass vial sealed with wax. I held it to the light expecting old nails or a scrap of moss. The vial was empty. It was not. If you've ever put your ear to a seashell, you know how your brain confuses pressure waves with sound. I put my ear to the vial. I heard one breath. It was mine because our own breathing sounds like how we remember our mothers when we were small. The second night brought a second envelope, another vial, and a second breath that did not belong to me. It belonged to me now. The new apartment had good bones and a landlord who painted over everything that tried to say otherwise. The bathroom fan rattled at night the way cheap fans do. At 3:13 it clicked off without my hand on the pull chain, and from the register where heat should come I heard the sound of a mouth opening on nothing. I imagined telling a maintenance man to reseal the ductwork because the throat in the mountain had found city air, and the maintenance man writing in the margin, "Tenant hears things." When it knocked on my door the 4th night, I answered by setting my cheek against the cool paint and whispering to the librarian's cassette, which I had transferred to my phone because our century makes ghosts into files. The folklorist's voice was thin and male and patient as dust. He said, in a tone that wanted to make the world small enough to manage, that every hollow has a mouth that remembers. You live here because something asked your family to come drink. You die here because something asked and you misunderstood the word. They call it hushing because it takes sound before anything else. If you don't give it the second breath, it has to wait. It's bad at waiting if you're kind to yourself. I'm trying to be kind. I drink standing up so sleep can't trick me. I leave the television on and turn the volume, so low it's only shadow. Sometimes the bee's word for my name crawls through the static. I pretend it belongs to a commercial for a honey brand that only sells in counties that never learned fear and say, "Good for them," like I mean it. Here is how I know the ending. I collected wells for a living. I know the way water chooses its old path, even after men reroute it. There are circles under my new apartment, the drain, the tub, the vent, the smoke detector red as a pupil, and all a kind of ring. They don't need stone. The thing in Stonevine Ridge does not have to travel. We brought it when we packed our lungs. I can seal holes until my hands give. There is always the next mouth. Last night my father, who lives 3 states away and taught me how to thread a fishing line and how to swear without being caught, called. His voice sounded like bad reception. He asked me, in a tone unfamiliar and exact, to take a deep breath and tell him everything from the beginning. Behind his words was someone counting quietly from 1 to 2. I told him the new project had me too busy to talk. I told him I loved him like a person who might not say it again, and hung up while being polite still counted as rude. If it comes through, it will be through something I hold dear. Old wells, new vents, phones insisting on a second hello. I keep the tiny vials on the windowsill, wax melted out so the breaths can leave, because I am naive enough to act ritual into being. Sometimes I listen, and swear I hear the first one fading. Sometimes I wake with dirt under my nails, even though my bed is on the 2nd floor over a dentist office that closes at 5. I don't go near stone rings anymore. I don't whistle for dogs. I teach my own body not to be pretty in its patterns. When the knocking starts, I count to 5 in a measure I hope stays ugly enough to save me another night. When it asks me to tell it the rest, I answer by staying alive, one breath at a time, never the second it wants. And if one day I forget and give it more, if you get a small envelope with wax melted thin and nothing inside, you'll know how to hold it to the light and tell me no, like a person who read an old instruction in a library and finally believed it.